Okay, everybody. This is the fourth video lecture on the chapter of infancy and toddlerhood, and the last ones are all about physical development, and this one is about cognitive development. Now, the key takeaway of this whole section is that children think differently. The way that their mind enables them to think is different than the way adults think. So that's really cognitive development is the process and the evolution. Yeah, the process and the evolution of children's way of thinking and understanding the world. So we could talk about the different theorists, and I'm going to kind of make reference to them, but I don't typically ask you to sort of match them up one for the other. But the one that gets the most attention is Piaget. Piaget, I hope I said that right, and I've tried to take the word apart here, his sensory motor stages of development. And so the thesis is that as we grow, we first of all, our understanding of the world and the way that we come to know the world is through our senses and the things that we can move. So knowledge is based on direct physical contact, taste, feel, what we can hear, and what we can move, our sensory and our movement about. And healthy development is simply the process of these things moving from one stage to another. A couple concepts that fall under this idea. One of them is what's called object permanence, and I just put a cute little cartoon in here. I will give you I'll create a video of learning about object permanence, but if you take that word apart, so you have permanent and object. So what object permanence means is a child's ability to know that just because you can't see something, it still exists. So Peekaboo is a game about object permanence. You can't see me, now you can. And you might see children, hiding out in the corner and thinking that because they can't see you can't see them. So the classic one is you take a toy and you hide it, and does the child look under the blanket for the toy? If they don't, the assumption is that they don't know it still exists because they can't see it. If they do, then they know that it's still there even though they can't see it. A similar kind of notion about object permanence is sometimes called A not B error, and this is a little bit more sophisticated. The drawing up here at the top, this is intended to illustrate that. But so it goes, I show a child a toy, I put it over here under A, under this, my right side, and the child uncovers it and they see that the toy is there under A. So then I do the same game again, except this time I put it under B. I hide it someplace else. Instead of the child looking where they saw me hide it, they go back to the original place. They go back to A. They go back to where they saw it the first time, instead of making the connection, okay, it's not hidden over here, instead it's hidden over there. And that's what we mean by A, not B error. But these are sophisticated ways for a child's brain. And then you have a theorist who probably is more in line with my worldview, and that's Vygotsky. And Vygotsky argued that it's not simply a matter of moving through these different stages, but the environment influences our cognitive development. So interaction with others, social interaction with other people, is critical to our cognitive development. One aspect of cognitive development is the evolution of language, right? So we go through these different stages of developing language. I could have put numbers here about them, but effectively the idea is that our ability to communicate, our ability to use language evolves in a series of steps. We start with cooing, which is an intentional vocalization that happens early. We move to babbling and gestures. The child starts to make clicks, and consonants are the first sort of sounds. There's somewhere around 10 months, researchers argue that a baby is able to understand what is being said. They may turn to words, they may respond. You move into a concept of what we call a halo. Well, I can't say those words. Around 12 words. And this is when there's a really cute example in the book, and where children will use just fractions, just a couple letters together to make ideas. So they just have partial words. But the parent or the caregiver who spent a lot of time with them recognizes that these sounds mean other things. Under extension, now I've not seen this in a textbook before. I've been familiar with a concept called overextension, but the principle is the same. And underextension is where you have a word for something like your dog, but you don't understand that they're doggy, right? That doggy doesn't refer just to your doggy, or maybe mama, that's your mama, but other people have mamas too. About 1 year old, a kid should have 50 words. At about toddlers, they should have about 200 words. So this is a pretty rapid development. And again, they're more likely to understand words than they are to be able to speak the words. And then sometime around 18 months old, normal development should include a child's ability to put two or more words together. So we call that telegraphic speech. Telegraphic speech. There are some theories as to how people learn language. Chomsky, who I don't know how much philosophy you read. He's a very famous philosopher, economist, linguist. I think he's considered like the most highly cited scholar, one of the most highly cited scholars in the world. His theory of language development was what we called nativism, and he argued that there's a brain structure, what he called the language acquisition device, that all of us have this brain structure that is prime or ripe. It's for developing language. And he observed that all over the world, people learn grammar, and grammar is the same all over the world. So children, without being instructed, learn the relationship between noun and verb. They just pick this up because they are native, they are biologically, cognitively programmed to develop language skills. We are just born able to do this. And that's his theory, that we are, it is just innate in us. Another theory called social pragmatics theory, and what this says is that the way that we learn language and sort of the sequence that we learn language is in a practical. So we learn the language skills necessary for meeting our needs at that particular time in our life. So obviously babies would learn mama and puppy and food and juice because those would be things that would be important to them at that time in their development. Okay, moving on. We're going on to another theory about cognitive development. These ideas were presented in another chapter, so this should be kind of reinforcement about the same ideas. Again, I'm not likely to sort of ask you to match, like, whose theory is this, but it's always easier and I think a more complete understanding if you're able to say, oh yeah, Pavlov's idea of classical conditioning. So Pavlov is the fellow with his dogs, right? He's the one that demonstrated that you can ring the bell and the dog doesn't respond to the bell. But if the dog has been trained that the bell means food, then eventually you can ring the bell and the dog will salivate. That's what we mean by classical conditioning, that you are already prepared to respond. The dogs are already prepared to respond to food. This is an unconditioned, I'll make sure I got this right. Oh my goodness, I'm going to get them all confused. This is an unconditioned response. They just know it. But by training, by pairing up the bell with the food, the dog can develop a conditioned response to the bell. Right? And I'm not going to ask you to remember to know the difference between conditioned and unconditioned response. That's for what you would learn in a psychology of learning class, actually. That's pretty much all you talk about in psychology of learning class. Another theory is what we would call operant conditioning. So anyway, back to this one. What I want you to know is that you take something you're not naturally developed to have a response to, you pair it up with something you are, and eventually you can have a biological or a learned response to something that you didn't already. So another one, I may have said this in another lecture, walking my dog. Well, that's probably not conditioned response. Oh, well, we'll use to pick up the bowl, right? I mean, the classic one is dogs and their food bowls. The dog has learned if you pick up their food bowl, it's going to come back with food in it. So then they salivate every time you pick up their food bowl. Operant conditioning is the same principle in that a person doesn't have a natural response, but you have to teach or condition the natural response. That's really what we mean by condition. It means it's taught. operant, a way of thinking about that one, is somebody learns how to operate on the environment. So to be conditioned means that a person, animals too, but a person has learned how, if they do this, if they can affect the way the environment, what happens in the environment by acting a certain way. So they have been conditioned, they have been taught that if they act in a certain way, they can cause something to happen. The classic ones are reinforcements. So reinforcements are defined as when someone has been conditioned to do the same thing more. You can have a positive reinforcement that says, if you do this, I give you something good. Or you can have a negative reinforcement which says that if you do this, I'll take away something bad. So the one in your textbook is the alarm clock. Or in my car, that if you don't have on your seatbelt, it rings. It goes beep, beep, beep. If you continue not to have on your seatbelt, it beeps even louder. You want that doggone beeping to stop, so you put on your seatbelt. So that is a negative reinforcement. And I have learned, right, I have been conditioned that I can affect the environment. I can make that doggone beeping stop by putting on my seatbelt. Punishments are also examples of operant conditioning. We kind of use this word, this concept, a little incorrectly in our culture, but punishments are when you can have positive and negative punishments. A positive punishment is you do something I don't want you to do, I'll do something bad. So you learn to stop doing that because you don't want the bad thing, right? So a punishment is anything to stop a behavior that if you do this, this bad thing happens. A negative punishment is, if you do this, I take something good away. If you do this, I will take away your cell phone. If you do this, I will take away your toy. So I get you to stop doing that by taking something away. So reinforcements say, I do something to get you to do something good. And punishments say, I do something to make you stop doing something bad. All right, I hope that was fun. Okay, I will stop here, and in the next slide we will talk about a little bit more cognitive development.